dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here tonight on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. The insanity that has been the last week and the last couple of weeks as we were, well, little vacation, little retooling, little recharging, re-energizing. And yet the world continued, or at least the White House continued to lose its ever-loving freaking minds. And this is where we are. At the end of the day, the coming crisis, the next one, going to be about the wall. And if you remember, and it's one of these bizarre things where, you know, Trump being all over the map knows, I want my wall. I want my wall. I want my wall. I got children who, when they were 2, were much better negotiators, much smarter about their demands. But you may remember back in 2015, he demanded the wall. It was going to be a 2,000-mile wall. It was going to be big and beautiful. It was going to be great, fantastic. And it was only going to cost $6 billion, and Mexico obviously was going to pay for it. And then, by 2016, that had changed. It cut it in half. It was only going to be 1,000 miles, but it was going to be big. It was going to be beautiful. It was going to be amazing. And it was only going to cost $8 billion. Half the distance, a little bit more of the cost. But no worry, no fret. Mexico was still going to pay for it. 2017, changed a little bit. We're going to go from 2,000 down to 1,000, down to 700 miles. And it was going to go up to $12 million. But hey, don't worry about it. Mexico is going to pay for it. To what now we've actually seen the president requesting Congress to fund what is a 316-mile wall, not as big and beautiful, more manageable, more like kind of a garden gate, if you will. It's going to cost $18 billion, and I guess Mexico's not going to pay for it after all. I guess we are. And the thing that gets me is, we all knew this is what was going to happen anyway, but we're doing it at the exception of doing other things. Right now, as we speak, and this is infuriating, and the message that this sends to those third world dictators around the globe, we don't really care about the children. We don't really care about human rights. It's a nice talking point, but as a nation, not so much. Because we still have not reauthorized the Children's Health Insurance Program, or CHIP. I mean, stop and think about it. Stop and think about it. You've got a guy who's asking for $18 billion to build this wall. And evidently, it's going to be, well, marginal. It's going to be small. It's going to be, you ever see the movie Spinal Tap, where they're dancing around the little Stonehenge? That was, when this came out, that was my image. That they wanted this big stage display of a Stonehenge that they could dance around, and it was, instead of having the 18 feet mark, they put the 18-inch mark. So they built an 18-inch Stonehenge. It's kind of what I'm thinking the wall's going to look like if they ever actually begin to build anything. But here's the thing: $18 billion for that. We could easily fund the Children's Health Insurance Program for about 3 years. We've given about $1.5 trillion away in this tax cut to millionaires and billionaires. $83 billion alone in the estate tax. We've given nearly $37 billion away to people making over $1 million a year just in 2019. Not to mention the $30 million that we've spent on Trump taking vacation at his golf club in Mar-a-Lago. You start, adding up all of the money that this administration's wasted on golf trips and on funding the Trump Tower, on funding Trump's properties, and you start thinking, we could probably get some pretty decent stuff, like healthcare for our kids. Now, these are the people, and this is the thing that gets me. These are the people who say they love the children. Very pro-birth. In fact, you may remember back in December where you had Paul Ryan saying the problem with the country, problem is we don't have enough children. You white people better go start having kids. Can you believe he actually said that out loud? Actually, yes, I can, because he's not the first to say it. You may remember another speaker, Tom DeLay, said the exact same thing. If we had those 40 million babies, we wouldn't need immigrants. Remember that? This is the thinking that these people have. But here's the thing: when they come out, don't really care. And over the holiday, this is one of those things that just I've obsessed about, and I still don't know what to do. A friend of mine who does a lot of work with the homeless, works at a shelter, and evidently there was a young woman there who was pregnant and had a Christmas time baby. The hospital evidently threatened to call youth services on her because she was homeless. And it's one of these situations where you go, do you take the child away because the mother's homeless out of fear that, it's the coldest time of the year and you're protecting the child? Or do you keep the family together in hopes that think about, this is the kind of situation that we're in. This is a woman who went and she had the baby. The birth happened. And here you've got this kind of scenario where I can't believe this is the country that we live in, where this kind of scenario happens. Now, fortunately, my friend was able to raise a couple $100, get her a hotel room to stay at for a couple of weeks while she recovers from having the child, and that. But at the end of it, still homeless. And you go, what do we do as a society? What do we do to make sure that no mother has that problem? Now, I had friends say, "Well, you could get all these programs. There are Section 8, there's food stamps, there's all this stuff." And you go, "Yeah, I'm glad you think it's so easy to navigate these programs. I'm glad you think it's a snap of a finger to get Section 8 housing, to get food stamps, to get children's health insurance. I'm glad that we've been trained in this society to think that it's so easy to walk through all this stuff. When the reality is it isn't. And I've really been struggling with this because, you find all these pro-birth people who say, "Hey, you should have that child." And then when the child's here, it's like, well, tough luck, you're on your own. And, to me, it's one of these bizarre kind of thought processes that they throw out. Well, now that the child's born, you should have made better decisions. And maybe it's me. And look, I don't know where I fall on whether children and youth take the child or not because of extreme conditions. But there's got to be a better system. There's got to be a better way than what we're doing right now. Don't you think? I mean, where are my pro-birth people? You wanted the child. You wanted the child born. It's been born. And help. Isn't that what our government's supposed to do? Isn't that why we created a social safety net? Wasn't that the point? Instead of using it as a tool to harm, as a tool to hold hostage, shouldn't we be figuring out how we move together? Instead of, we're building a damn wall. We're going to spend $18 billion building a portion of a wall that we know is not going to work. We know it. Because guess what? What we know, most of the people who are here in an undocumented fashion, they came here on visas. Very few of them run across the border in the middle of the night. Very few. Very few of them, dig tunnels and go across the desert. Most of them come on a plane. And they overstay their visas. And they have jobs. I mean, it's bizarre to me that we're going to, because we look everywhere else that's ever built a wall, and we've gone, it's a failure. What makes us think that it's going to be this wonderful thing? And oh, by the way, did you know we've got giant walls already? We've got giant fences, we've got electronics, we've got all kinds of stuff. And from what I've told from people who do this stuff, the only thing the wall's going to really do is create a much better system for the drug cartels to bring in drugs and old people as well. So it'll be good for business, well, underground business. It's really just crazy to me, honestly and truthfully. And to see where we've come, and you look at this tax scheme that they've thrown out, and to have not reauthorized something that universally everyone used to believe in. Kids should have health care. We're getting to the point, from what I'm told, that it's going to almost be too late. States like Pennsylvania in 2 months are going to be cutting people off the program. And Pennsylvania is not one of the more dire states. Some of the more dire states are looking at the end of January cutting people off. And what is that going to mean? We don't know. But we know that there are millions of kids. We know that there are over 2 million children who are on the brink of losing their health insurance. We know that. And the other thing that we know is we know that Congress and their inability to do this, or unwillingness, I wouldn't even say inability, I would say more unwillingness, has really shown their priorities. Their priorities are, we don't care about kids. It's a nice talking point. It's a nice election era kind of bumper sticker. But when the rubber hits the road, when the funding priorities have to happen, well, those kids don't vote yet. And we don't seem to care. Scary stuff, which is why, again, contact your representatives, call early, call often, hammer, hound, argue, complain, do what you got to do. But this has got to get passed. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, Sarah Kendzior is going to be here. We're going to talk about the Fire and Fury weekend. The big book. Is Junior treasonous? Or did Bannon just misspeak? Love to hear her thoughts. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. Where working people come to talk.
90% of the wealth, 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1980. That was the day Robert Goss, president of the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union, called a nationwide strike against the oil industry. The union sought to negotiate for higher wages and better medical and dental plans in the second year of a 2-year contract. 24-hour pickets were set up immediately. For a good portion of the strike, workers at many of the refineries stopped strike-breaking scabs from entering. but some refineries used management and contract workers to maintain production levels effectively. Strikers confronted scabs daily and in a few instances faced violence on the picket lines. At least one manager crossing picket lines was charged with second-degree assault after having rammed his car into a picketer at a Texaco refinery in Washington state. In Texas City, the deaths of 2 contract workers at an Amoco refinery made news when Amoco refused to allow a union representative to accompany an OSHA inspector through the site. Amoco sought a restraining order against OSHA and accused the agency of interjecting itself into a labor dispute. At Houston's Atlantic Richfield, women mobilized to form picket lines in defiance of an injunction against union pickets. In Los Angeles, area unions including the UAW, UE, ILWU, and the Teamsters formed the Los Angeles Harbor Council in solidarity with the strike. On March 1st, the council conducted a one-day shutdown of the LA ports and strike support rally that demanded victory to the OCAW strike. Oil workers would stay out 14 weeks before the strike was finally settled. They successfully won pay increases and increases in employer contributions to the medical plan and dental plan for the very first time. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Your proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Oh, what a weekend. What a weekend it was of fire and fury and we're gonna ban books, and I was waiting for the burners to come out. We should be burning books. I was waiting for it until you sat down and you thought about it. This whole weekend was really about distraction and about keeping Trump's name on everyone's tongue and about the distraction, because we didn't talk about the fact that, you know what, they still haven't reauthorized the CHIP program. You know what, they passed a tax bill that's going to screw the working class of this country. You know what, they still haven't done anything on trade or manufacturing or infrastructure or, any of those things that we, the average Americans, want to see done. We're talking about a book and a president who wants to ban it. I couldn't help but think over the weekend, had Obama gone this route about, complaining and wanting to ban every book written about him, he would have done nothing his entire presidency but that. That's how many books were out there attacking Obama. So this, really bizarre to me. But again, it all plays into the look at the shiny thing, stupids. And here to talk about the fire and fury and, well, forget about it. I've asked our good friend Sarah Kendzior to come talk with us. She's got a new piece over at the Globe and Mail. Trump's no genius, but he's smart at playing dumb. Sarah, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So, do you read this whole thing the way I do? It's nice distraction. It is, it's what Trump does.
I mean, yeah, to some extent, but we also, as individuals, have some control over what we're going to prioritize, and that particularly includes the political press. And I think a book like Fire and Fury, which is written by Michael Wolff, who is a critic of the media, he's probably best known for that, and now he's, the insider on Trump, is of course going to attract that kind of attention. This is like catnip for them, and that book dominated political discourse over the week, and I read the whole thing, and I was surprised at the content, because the sections that were leaked online were far more damning and juicy, honestly, than the book as a whole, which actually works in a lot of ways, I think, to benefit the Trump administration and the GOP.
But isn't that how you like any movie you'll ever see? The trailer always has the best parts, the rest of it not so great. I mean, isn't it kind of the same way with these books?
Yeah. It was interesting because, of course, along with the book itself, there was this feud, which looked a little I don't want to say staged, but a little overwrought to me between Trump and Bannon, where, he wanted to ban the book, he wanted to sue Bannon, and, he was saying that Bannon had lost his mind, and Bannon was upset, and they were at each other's throats. And, again, this is the kind of thing the media jumped at. But then you read the book, and, that's in there, but it just, as a whole, just shows an incompetent administration, a childlike president, and really leaves out what are the most damning parts of both Trump and Bannon. I mean, in Trump's case, it's obviously his, capacity for crime, his history of crime, his history of crime linked with political ambition, with Russia. A lot of the details of the Russia probe that are very important were left out, very basic things like Trump confessing to obstruction of justice on national television, things that you just could mention in a sentence and provide a little bit of context about what's going on. For Bannon, it's not like he's portrayed, either of them are really portrayed in a flattering light. They either look out of their minds or just consumed by rage, but, his Nazi ties, the violence that he's spurred as an individual is also kind of played down. And part of that is the way that Wolf writes, where he sort of pretends that he's inside their minds and is, showing what they're thinking to the reader from their own perspective. But that means that Trump is presenting himself to the reader as somebody who is innocent and who is being framed and who's not worried at all about being found out, but is just worried about this, conspiracy against him, the wiretaps from Obama, all the stuff that didn't really happen. And so the book kind of helps him by, showing him in that way, kind of implying innocence and also leaving out really vital background context that, states the kind of criminal behavior that's been going on, not just in the White House, but throughout Trump's whole life.
But don't you think that's the point in bringing him in? I mean, because I watched what we were led to believe was, a fight between Bannon and Trump, and I immediately thought WWE or WWF or whatever it was, because Trump was, one of those, he'd come in and play wrestler guy for a minute or two. It just seemed like a bad episode of wrestling this or that.
Yeah, absolutely, and they've done this so many times, and you can kind of get a sense for, when it's real. God knows how many times they said Jeff Sessions is about to be fired, where it's very obvious that he's not. And they have this back and forth, and, it's not like I think that these guys just love each other and that there isn't any animosity at all, but I think, they're interested in self-preservation, they're politically savvy, and I think they realize that aligning with each other is more beneficial than going at each other's throats. I think there might be some genuine animosity between Bannon and Kushner, but, it's a bit of a different thing. And so I didn't see it. I mean, it was too quick, and it reflected the contents of what was in the article. But, Trump knew Michael Wolff was writing this book, and Trump knew Michael Wolff. Michael Wolff had interviewed him several times, came from the exact same kind of high society media and business circles as Trump, is known as a notorious gossip. And so Trump, the guy who, won't do press conferences, who slaps down NDAs on everybody, who threatens all the journalists who want to spill his secrets, just happens to let Michael Wolff roam around the White House with the tape recorder. Like, he's not a genius, but I think he realized what kind of book Michael Wolff was going to write. And it was going to be a book that was full of gossip and intrigue and personality. It was not going to be a book about policy. It was not going to be a book about criminality, because it would potentially implicate, people in Wolff's own circle. I'm not saying in any way that Michael Wolff did anything criminal, but, he has some ties to, some of the Fox News and other people that are kind of widely implicated in the probe. And so that's just not what he would do. He's a, very personality and gossip-centered writer, and so he'd produce that kind of work. And I think Trump could kind of trust that that's what would happen, and that is what happened.
Yeah, and you had written in your article that, something I had just told someone today, that, Trump has the mindset that there's no such thing as bad publicity. I mean, he came from New York, where he played the New York media, like a violin. And, he's just taken that shtick to the national level. And that is kind of the genius of Trump, if there is genius.
Yeah, he doesn't have any shame. I don't think he gets embarrassed. I think when people are, calling him names or, criticizing him, he gets revved up. He likes a battle. He likes to kind of smack people around, and that's how he sees it. I don't think that there's anything he'll shy away from, with a couple exceptions. And, one of that is the threat of his money getting taken away, and the other is the threat of being criminally prosecuted and possibly of his family being criminally prosecuted, although I'm not sure he really honestly cares that much about Kushner and some of the others, but those are the two things. As long as he has money and attention, and in this case, political power, as long as he feels like he's winning, I think people could say pretty much whatever they want. And that the greatest nightmare for him would be to have nobody talking about him, would be to be a has-been, to be forgotten, and that did kind of happen to him for a time in the 1990s, and he worked very hard to rebuild himself, and of course he had a lot of assistance in that regard from Russian investors and from people in Hollywood, and so he's always had backers. He's not just sort of this one-man guy operating alone. He has people who help on the legal side with things like NDAs to shape his image, and he has people who are very seasoned in PR to help him as well. And so, the idea that he's incredibly incompetent, that he's just this sort of childlike moron, is not true. He's emotionally volatile, and, completely ignorant, or not completely ignorant, but mostly ignorant of geopolitical matters. But, he's street smart, and I think in this sense, in terms of spin, he knows what he's doing.
Yeah. Are you looking forward to, as I am, the potential of Mueller interviewing him? I mean, I seen this story. I saw this story the other day with, I guess Bannon has been shot in 2015. Had shopped some information on some documents about Trump and organized crime, and I'm thinking, of Mueller seeing all this stuff and going, that interview, I would love to be a fly on the wall for.
Oh, yeah, I know. There's been a part of me all along that keeps wishing that Trump would view this as some sort of, reality TV, like, ultimate victory, like a ratings bonanza. We would be able to watch all of this, which, of course, is not how it's going to play out. From what I heard, they actually, he wants his legal team to just provide written answers, which is just, the worst kind of interview style for Mueller. And, it's not going to happen. I think Mueller has already refused that and is requiring that he answer questions directly and spontaneously in person. So yeah, that'll be very interesting. I don't know how much of it will be relayed to the public or when, but yeah, it'll be interesting to watch his mood that day.
Yeah, I would like to see it on pay-per-view. We could maybe we could fund the children's health insurance program with that.
Yeah, really, no kidding.
I mean, are you as upset about this stuff as I am? I mean, look, we just gave away $1.5 trillion. We've given billions of dollars away to the on the estate tax. We've given wants $18 billion to build a wall. All of this stuff, but we can't. Sorry, kids. Sorry. Tough luck.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's disgusting. And, I feel like the economy was in bad shape before Trump came in. I think that was one of the reasons he was able to come in. And so people who were already vulnerable are having what was left of the social safety net being stripped away. And among the biggest victims of these policies are children. And, it's outrageous. It's like something that they could, I think, fairly easily solve by deducting, from other parts of the budget, in addition to the massive tax cut. He also is investing I think $1 trillion into the nuclear weapons program, in anticipation of nuclear weapons use against North Korea, or, what they call kind of a revised nuclear program. And, they're gearing up for multiple wars. Like, it's just the last thing he cares about are American citizens. And that's always been the central truth of Trump and, the irony of his MAGA slogan. So is
Trump's button really bigger? Because I was told that there isn't actually a button sitting on the desk, as Kim Jong-un had said he has one on his desk, and Trump alluded to saying he had one bigger. Is there really a button on the desk?
I feel very, very sorry for whoever has to investigate the size of Trump's button. I'll just put it that way. But it's not an enviable task. But that whole thing is just, that's always in the back of my mind. And all this hoopla about, will Oprah run for 2020? I feel like on one hand you have people in this sort of fantasy of like a magical celebrity candidate who will, you know, wipe Trump out and right our wrongs and who has a moral compass. But the real fantasy, I think, might be, wow, like we got 2020, like we're still around, like we're still a country, we're not in rubble, you know, things are still happening. I mean, that's the part that I almost find more fantastic, you know, than Oprah running, because this is really not looking good. And there's been some scary rhetoric out there, you know, a lot of warmongering and kind of normalization of the idea of a nuclear strike, you know, and so I am concerned about that.
Yeah, so you're not on board with the Oprah rock ticket?
I have no real opinion about it because I basically, you know, sincerely think that we need to focus on the 2018 midterms before we focus on anything else because, you know, that actually does hold the possibility of Trump being impeached or some sort of significant action happening. You know, we also may have the results of the Mueller probe this year, and we also may just have, you know, cataclysmic or world-changing events, you know, before 2020 or 2019. We might be in a war. We might have a recession. And so whatever candidate emerges is, you know, will be valued for their ability to respond to those events. And I think right now, you know, especially because of Michael Wolff's book, and personality is very much on everybody's mind. Everybody's talking about Trump's temperament and his mentality and his character and all this kind of stuff. And so Oprah, of course, is this total opposite of Trump and this, you know, great, you know, sort of force that counteracts him. And I think that, you know, that hit hard. But, you know, as a president, like, would I want her being in charge of North Korea? I mean, no, but like, what I want, is there anyone I particularly want? Like, I don't know. But I'm not completely, you know, I'm not 100% against it. It's just more like, would she take it seriously? And, you know, it's interesting to me that we have this whole Oprah debate today that's like so intense, and no one's sort of thinking like, well, what are Oprah's positions? What are Oprah's policies? Like, maybe it just sounds like a weird question, you know, but it's like, I'm honestly curious. I would like to know, like, is Oprah well read on policy? Does she, you know, what's her opinion on how different mechanisms of the government work? Like, that's the kind of question I want to know of any candidate, you know, whether they're famous or not. So.
Yeah, well, that's because you actually consider the candidates and the positions and all of that. But for most people, it's just a popularity contest.
It's a quaint little habit of mine, yeah.
Yeah, you know, I mean, look, and I think most people right now are looking at this going, anybody or Donald Trump? Absolutely,
yeah, well,
anybody or Donald Trump?
Yeah, I mean, if it's, my God, if it's Oprah versus Trump, I mean, of course I'm voting for Oprah. But if it's like, you know, I'm trying to think of like a really bad celebrity. I mean, like most anybody versus Trump. You know, I mean, maybe if it's like Bannon versus Trump,
how about another Russian candidate like Steven Seagal? Throw Steven Seagal.
Yeah,
up
I mean, God, yeah, it's just such a horrible, like the fact that this is actually a legit conversation that I really don't know what direction things are going in terms of who is considered viable now. Like the standard viability is completely destructed. You know, I think that's something else that everybody's now aware of now that we're seriously contemplating President Winfrey for 2020. And that can go, you know, a number of directions. I think we've had a lot of presidents who kind of, you know, just ticked off the boxes, like George W. Bush. He like went to a fancy school. He was, you know, the governor of a state. He was in a political dynasty, and he was president, and he was terrible. And in part, you know, because he was utterly disinterested in what he was doing. He didn't care enough to find out about the policies he was supposed to be enacting or the people he was supposed to be representing. And so, you know, sometimes I do understand the appeal of an outsider, because what good is having that training allegedly and that knowledge if you're not going to do anything with it? If you're just going to, you know, sit there while the world burns, then, you know, what difference does that make? If somebody comes from the outside and is very, you know, determined to learn the system, to understand policies, to help people, you know, I would prefer that. But that's fairly idealistic, I think, on my part.
Yeah, I'm with you, especially when we're talking about, there are actually people talking about war with North Korea, and I'm going, really? We really want to get involved in that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is the problems that we're facing are so momentous that you really need like a really fantastic, incredibly well-rounded candidate to handle them all. And I just don't think that that's out there. You know, I kind of felt this way when Obama came in. I felt like, wow, like he was dealt like the shittiest deck of any new president I've ever seen in my lifetime, between the recession and 2 wars and rapid technological change. Like, you know, it was bad. It was rougher because he was relatively inexperienced compared to, you know, other presidents as a relatively new senator, and but at least he was smart. He was a constitutional scholar. He understood how government works. He tried. Like, we're in a place now where people aren't trying. Like, they actively, I think, in some sense, want things to fail so that they can capitalize on it financially for themselves. And they don't care about massive death tolls. They don't care about children losing health insurance. They don't care about these really horrible things that are happening that they could control if they wanted to, but they just don't care.
It's crazy stuff. And then we find out the president doesn't really get to work until noon because he spends all morning tweeting about Fox and Friends.
No, that's executive time. That's like my favorite thing, because now whenever I'm like binge watching Netflix, I just tell, like whoever I'm sort of putting off, I'm like, no, I'm sorry, like it's executive time now. And then I'm just kind of working through Black Mirror, but
There you go. Now we all have a new time for slacking off. It's called executive time.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. Sarah, I appreciate the time. I appreciate your thoughts. Good stuff.
Yeah, thank you.
Always great talking with you, our good friend Sarah Kendzior. Our quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
The bills are creeping through the door. It's desperate times, so desperate measures we explore. Marching on the Capitol to lobby leaders for involvement. 3,000 people screaming out, "Where's our government?" Lawsuits and arraignments, members under company surveillance. Public divided, either they love us or they hate us. Profit billions off our back, and it's still not enough. They should have took into account that we never give up. We'll be here one day longer. One day longer. The people's voice is stronger. Keep fighting for these rights for generations. It's next. One day longer. One day longer.
Your working class radio experience, where hard work, common sense, and rational thought are a reality. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1939. That was the day a new radio show began on CBS Radio.
Welcome to the Motion Picture Star's own radio program, The Gulf Screen Guild Show. With Jack Bentley, Joan Crawford, Reginald Gardner.
The show featured some of the biggest names in Hollywood. All of the actors' fees were donated to the Motion Picture Relief Fund. The fund was started in 1922 with the motto of taking care of our own. Proceeds from the show went to support the motion picture Country Home for retired workers in the film industry. These included actors, cameramen, set designers, and even security guards. These retired workers only paid what they could afford to live there. Eventually, the retirement home allowed working people from the television industry as well. Gulf Oil sponsored the program for its first 3 seasons. It was called the Gulf Screen Guild Show. Over the years, the show took on several other sponsors and names. It also migrated to NBC, then to ABC, and then back to CBS Radio. In all, it ran for 14 seasons and more than 500 episodes. In its early years, the show was a variety review. It included songs along with dramatic and comedy sketches. Later, the show recreated films for the radio audience. It was a challenge to get a whole film down to just 22 minutes. Films covered by the show included classics such as Casablanca, Arsenic and Old Lace, and Pinocchio. But despite the changes and challenges, the show raised $800,000 for the retirement home by 1942. The retirement home was almost closed in 2009, but continues operations. Workers in many industries have long found creative and collaborative ways to support each other and to truly take care of their own. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
From 1776 forward, the common yeoman, America's middle class, has been hailed as the virtuous heart and backbone of our nation. How ironic, since it took 150 years before we actually created a broad middle class. Before the 1930s, most Americans were poor or near poor. And yes, created is the correct term for how our middle class came to be, pushed by 2 historic forces of social transformation. First, the devastation of the Great Depression created a grassroots rebellion of labor, farmers, and others against the careless moneyed class that caused the 1929 crash. These forces produced FDR and his New Deal of union rights, Social Security, and other tools that empowered ordinary Americans to begin rising up from poverty. Second, The government's national mobilization for World War II created an explosion of new jobs and opportunities for millions, opening people's eyes, boosting confidence, and raising expectations. A post-war rise in unionism, passage of the GI Bill, a housing program, and other progressive actions led to a doubling of the median family income in only 30 years, creating a middle class that included nearly 60% of Americans by the late 1970s. Then, poof! Washington's commitment to a middle class suddenly fizzled in the 1980s as Republicans and many Democrats switched from supporting egalitarianism to backing the elitism of their corporate donors. Ever since, they steadily disempowered workers and enthroned the rich, thus imposing today's abominable, un-American culture of inequality across our land. This is Jim Hightower saying, just as progressives deliberately push public policies to create the middle class, so are today's economic royalists deliberately pushing plutocratic policies to destroy it. That is the momentous struggle that calls us to action in this political year.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show. It's the Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Big news out of my home state of Ohio. And look, I love Dennis Kucinich. Evidently filed paperwork today in Columbus establishing a campaign committee. That means the potential that he's going to run for governor. In fact, the news reports out today say that the intention is next week. A week from today, Dennis will throw his name in to run for governor. The 71-year-old former mayor of Cleveland, someone who as a kid I actually handed out flyers for, and former congressman from the area and, well, presidential candidate in 04 and 08. Should be interesting as he joins what is really a very, very crowded field. Here to talk a little bit about that and, well, other things that are going on around the nation. Bob Ney, Talk Media News. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thank you, Rick. Happy to be here.
So what do you think? You got Dennis jumping into a really crowded Democratic field. What do you think?
Well, you know, the state of Ohio, as you know, and it's your home state, and Ellen Ratner and myself, and the state of Ohio is very dominated by the Republican Party, and it went from basically a Democrat state at one time to a Republican-dominated state. And this is the year everybody's looking towards, you know, what will happen with Ohio. And I think there's a couple races that are, for example, Zach Space, who took my place in Congress for a term. Zach is running for auditor. I think that's a great shot for the Democratic side to pick up. When it comes to governor, though, which is always the jackpot, you know how everybody wants to see the gubernatorial race. This one's fascinating. I was told a year ago by a mutual friend of Dennis Kucinich and myself that he would be most likely running. And I think at one point in time, you know, he was maybe not going to run, but something, and I don't know what, has changed his mind, so he gets in there. Look, you know, and I know the two top contenders in this are going to be Richard Cordray and Dennis Kucinich. Those are the two. It's a crowded field, but those are the two. On the Republican side, they did a lot to consolidate a great big fight because you had Mary Taylor, Renassi, congressman from Youngstown area, but John Husted, the Secretary of State, and Mike DeWine at the top of the ticket as Attorney General, and now as the gubernatorial running individual. They combined Husted and DeWine instead of running against each other. That cinches it on the Republican side, you know, for the nomination. So this is going to be fascinating. Look, Dennis Kucinich, I served with Dennis for 11 years, worked with him on a ton of issues, especially right out front. Bernie Sanders, Dennis and I, Ron Paul, and some others worked on all of the trade issues. Dennis was a champion of those. And you know, it's funny, Rick, when you said 71-year-old Dennis Kucinich, he's a vegan, he's in great shape, and I don't picture Dennis as 71. I picture him as younger than me.
Yeah.
So that's just
No, I mean, look, the last time I saw him, he was in great shape, and look,
Right.
he's got a beautiful bride, and I got to be honest with you, don't know why you'd leave the house.
Well, I went to his wedding up in Cleveland. It was a very fascinating wedding with a mixture of the Republicans and the Democratic side in attendance. Because, look, I've said this 100 times on radio when I'm asked, I do these radio shows, and I'm asked, okay, did you serve with this person or that person? And I'm asked to reflect on things. And I've always said this. Ron Paul on one side of the spectrum and Dennis Kucinich on the other side of the spectrum were the two people that stand out in my mind that what you saw is what you got. You know?
No,
Bernie Sanders is in that category too.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's going to be an interesting race, and one that I would like to see Dennis do well in. I think, look, as a kid, like I said, I handed out flyers for him when he ran for mayor of Cleveland.
And when I see Dennis, I'll remind him that you were a kid. That does make him older, right?
It does. I was a young kid at the time. And in fact, to be honest with you, I didn't even know who he was. It was one of those things where my mother had taken me and it was, here, go hand these out. And I did. And it's one of those things that I happen to remember. Now, but as you said, on the Republican side, it's, there's not so many names. Is there a possibility that now that we see that the guy who was going to run for Senate on the Republican side against Sherrod Brown has dropped out? Do you see maybe some of those from the crowded side of the Republican gubernatorial side maybe going over to the Senate? Do we see any of that?
Well, look, they have very little time. They have to file, if my memory serves me correct, February 7th or 8th.
Right. 7th.
Josh Mandel had this surprise exit. He was the state treasurer, very aggressive, and he had this, shocking announcement in Ohio politics really last week that his wife has a health issue. It may be long-term, and he's going to stay state treasurer, but he is not going to run for the Senate. Left a huge vacuum. But let me say one thing about Josh Mandel, and this is a little bit of the writing on the wall. Franklin County, which Columbus, Ohio, is the capital of Franklin County. Franklin County Republican Party did not endorse Josh Mandel for the Senate seat. They endorsed a man named Gibbons. I don't even know his first name.
Right.
From Cleveland, Ohio. He's some kind of businessman. I don't know anything about him. Look, I'm a political addict. I'm a junkie. I follow politics. I don't know anything about him. But this was a payback because Josh Mandel went after John Kasich, complained when John Kasich did the Obamacare buy-in, etc. And he was very vocal. So this was the payback. And Josh Mandel was starting to lose other counties. You don't, as an incumbent state treasurer, lose a county. But having said that, Gibbons who? From where? What does he do? If they don't find somebody, then Sherrod Brown is going to have a walk. And the Senate's up for grabs. This is a year, if Sherrod is not kept busy, you know what happens. Sherrod has resources to do what? Help other incumbent Democratic races.
And that's what I'm hoping for. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah.
Because at some point, I'm hoping the Democrats take back the Senate this time around, so you stop some of those really, really bad court appointments, especially if there's heaven forbid, another Supreme Court seat opened up here in the next year or two.
Now, I did make a prediction on Talk Media News site. The Senate's going to end up 50-50. That's my prediction.
So the Republicans maintain control.
Well, not really, because when it's 50-50, you still need the 60, and the Democratic side will have extreme leverage. Yes, a tiebreaker, the vice president breaks it, but 50-50, there'll be a lot of control by the. It could go it's most likely will go Democratic, but I think in the best case scenario for the Republicans, 50-50.
All right. Well, it's one of the better ones I've heard, so I'll move on. I understand that the president and his advisors, as we've been seeing reports, planning on being interviewed by Robert Mueller.
Well, yes, the member of the Blumenthal, the member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, had made that statement, and I guess they're going, and I kind of expected it. Now, it's interesting, though. I wonder what the reaction by the lawyers will be. Can he be interviewed? Will they argue some type of constitutional situation? I don't know. I don't know what their reaction will be. This will be fascinating to see where it goes. But I think enough indicators are out there that there's going to be some type of interview directly with the president and Mueller.
That's one of the questions I was going to ask you. I mean, because I'm sure they're going to try and limit, what it is that they talk about, what it is that he's questioned on. But is there a way for him to get completely out of it? Executive privilege, something like that? Anything?
I mean, he could say that. Look, Bill Clinton should never, and I said this at the time and I'll say it today, Bill Clinton should never have been compelled to testify or be deposed, I should say, in the Gennifer Flowers matter, because sitting presidents can't be deposed unless it's usually a felony, type of situation. But the Supreme Court ruled and the rest is history. So I don't know if they'll use some type of, defense that he can't be deposed because he's a sitting president. I don't know. It's hard to say. If they do that, obviously it's going to be a lot worse than if he sits down.
Yeah, but aren't those different scenarios? I mean, you're talking about a civil case. Here
Right.
we're talking about, I would argue, a national security issue of the Russians meddling in our elections and possible collusion between the sitting president and a foreign power.
Right. But there might be still the same argument. I mean, the Clinton people argued he shouldn't be compelled in a civil case, and I frankly think he shouldn't have been at the time, but the court ruled different. And they will probably argue that the president can't be compelled in a case unless Mueller says, well, potentially he's going to file a felony. I don't know. This one, I'm very curious to see how this is handled. I think it's extremely delicate how the Trump lawyers handle this, obviously.
They say, may you live in interesting times. These are most certainly interesting times, Bob.
Yes, they are.
Now, there's you and I have had this conversation about debts and the government shutting down, and evidently January 19th at 11:59 p.m. and 59 seconds, we're going to run out of money again, I guess. We're going to play this game on and on and on and on and on.
Right. Cliff, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, it seems to me now you've got the Republicans who control all the levers of power now saying that, well, it's the Democrats who they're going to shut the government down.
Well, what they're seizing on, and this is sort of like a Ted Cruz in reverse, in the sense that, Ted Cruz had one issue. He was going to shut the government down, which I personally have never believed in one issue shutting the government down. It would have to be, extremely monumental to do that. But Ted Cruz used to push that issue, and of course the Republicans feared that actually happening over the issue, which was health care. Now, on the Democratic side now, not all, but some progressive groups are making this argument. And this is where the Republicans, Rick, are getting this from. Some progressive groups are making the argument to the Democratic side, when it comes to DACA and the Dreamers, this is so important, don't go along with funding measures anymore. The Republicans see that. So the Republicans, of course, drum it up. This is such a switch. The Republicans drum it up then and say, oh, if it shuts down, it's because of the Democratic side, knowing that there is some pressure on Schumer and Pelosi to not go along with funding measures. Now, if Schumer and Pelosi don't go along with the funding, or if they do go along with it, it's not because they don't care about DACA, but it's because the fact that it's 2018, it's an election year, it's midterm elections. Neither party really, they might say things, they don't really want to shut the government down.
No, and again, I go back to something you said a long, long time ago, that, this used to be a yawn vote. This is money that's already spent. This is money that should have already been argued over. This is just paying your freaking bills.
Yeah, you're right. And I've said this, so many times to you. It was what I call the yawn vote. You took your voting card, you stuck it in the machine, you yawned, you voted, maybe somebody gave a speech against it, and then you went to dinner. I think, 6 times under George Bush, we all, made this happen. Because you're right. This is raising the debt ceiling to pay for what you already voted for. So if the Republican Congress already appropriated money, raise that debt ceiling, because you shouldn't have appropriated it in the first place if you didn't want to raise the debt ceiling. And so this has been turned into the do-all vote, though. This is the conservative balance the nation's budget vote, which it's not. It's just raising the debt level. I mean, I don't like the debt level, but it's raising it to satisfy what somebody already voted for.
I mean, the time to argue was a while ago, and they chose not to.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to this immigration thing, because this is going to be the issue in 2018. You can already see the Trump people, throwing this out, especially with today's order to kick, some 200,000 Salvadorians out of the country. You could already see how this is beginning to play out, and I guess taking sides right now.
Well, look, with this issue, let's take Trump first. I believe, Rick, that if there is the mention of a wall, a sort of wall, anything to do with a wall that anybody pays for or doesn't, or even a commission study, president will sign a bill, okay, with DACA in it, if there's a wall. Republicans in the House and Senate are different. There are moderate Republicans who want this issue solved. There's a lot of sympathy. Somebody can believe that, you shouldn't be illegal and running across the border, that's fine. But a lot of people who believe that, as you know, still believe, wait a minute, DACA, the kids were brought here, they've been raised here, a lot of them don't even speak Spanish. This is a different ball game. So there's going to be some moderate Republicans out there that are going to have some sympathy to combine with, a Democratic side. But Trump has a different agenda. Those Republicans that are moderates, they don't care about the wall. The president has the wall issue. So you've got two different dichotomies going.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. And finally, some pushback on Franken's ouster. I guess one of the big Democratic donors saying they may pull some of the money back.
Yes, they're saying they're going to pull some money back. Particularly, they're angry at Gillibrand. They think that, there should have been due process in the Franken case. They were too quick to throw him out. Now, on the other hand, there's an announcement from California today of $30-some million going to be put in the race. So, on one hand, they lost some. But I have heard from, friends of mine in the progressive movement, they weren't happy with the fact that, there was no due process. So, but the focal point seems to be the people who made comments, and it seems that for some reason they singled out Gillibrand, don't you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, she was one of the leaders, the leading voices, making that push. So it would be surprised that that's where they go after first.
Sure.
But she's in a really safe state. I don't fear she's going to lose.
Yeah, I don't think so.
There you go, Bob. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Always good
Thank you
talking
so much.
to our good friend Bob Ney. Talk Media News. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to the Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
From New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. Pope Francis gave his yearly State of the World speech on Monday, warning more than 180 Vatican ambassadors that a century after World War I, efforts to enshrine international peace were crumbling. Francis praised 56 countries for signing a treaty prohibiting nuclear weapons in 2017, but cautioned that the rate of negative developments was outpacing positive developments. Francis urged negotiations to end the standoff on the Korean Peninsula and in Syria, and in a line that seemingly targeted leaders in Europe and the United States, he criticized those who stoke fears about warnings over migrants and migration. It must not be forgotten that migration has always existed, Francis said, reminding the crowd that, quote, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the history of salvation is essentially a history of migration. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is celebrating his birthday on Monday. The precise year of his birth is unknown, with experts from various countries pinning him down as 34, 35, or 36. Either way, one thing is for certain. This year's birthday is a little different. 2 years ago, Kim preceded his birthday week with a nuclear test, the largest in the country's history at that time. But this year, he's preparing for peace talks. On Tuesday, North Korean and South Korean diplomats will meet at the DMZ to discuss arrangements surrounding next month's South Korean Olympic Games. And Vice President Mike Pence will head to the Middle East later this month, with planned stops in Egypt, Jordan, and Israel. Pence had initially planned that trip for December, in the weeks after President Trump's recognition of Jerusalem, but that visit was delayed in case Pence was needed as a deciding vote in the tax reform push. For more global news headlines, visit TalkMediaNews.com.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Often, significant days in history pass with little attention. This day in labor history is one such day. The year was 1811, and Charles Deslandes, an enslaved sugar laborer in the New Orleans Territory, led what became one of the largest slave revolts in American history. The Deslandes family, along with Charles, had been in Haiti during the slave uprising of the Haitian Revolution. They fled the revolution to what was then called the German Coast, an area of sugar plantations northwest of New Orleans. On the evening of January 8th, Charles led an insurrection at the Andre Plantation. The insurrection grew as enslaved laborers marched down the Mississippi River armed with axes, hoes, and a few firearms. They burnt plantations on their march. It's estimated that as many as 500 enslaved laborers joined the revolt over the two-day march. The revolution was put down brutally, however, by plantation owners and their militias, as well as federal troops who killed more than 90 of the revolting slaves. The plantation bosses, with their militias and the federal troops, hung some of the bodies of those who took part in the revolt on poles as warnings to other enslaved people. Such uprisings ushered in an era of brutal repression, as authorities worried that the Haitian Revolution could spread to the U.S. South. Slave codes, the laws that undergirded the slave system, became more strict and oppressive, yet enslaved people continued their effort for freedom until they finally won emancipation more than 5 decades later. And what happened to Charles Deslandes, you may ask? Well, he was captured by the militia. As Samuel Hamilton described, Charles had his hands chopped off, then shot in one thigh and then the other, until they were both broken, then shot in the body. And before he had expired, he was put into a bundle of straw and roasted. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Demanding the super rich to pay their fair share for once. The Rick Smith Show.
I got a bad case, I'm turning up, it's getting cold in here, it's a fire.
So you remember, it wasn't all that long ago, just last year. Remember how the Republicans were saying that, if we give business enough money, if we give them, give them more. We give them more, they're going to invest it, right? Remember that? I do. I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember the argument because, business does what business does. They take the money and they invest it, right? Isn't that what we're told? So when I saw this report from today that Pfizer evidently is going to end its research of neuroscience drugs, those for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, it kind of made me go, but I thought we were giving them more money because the drug companies, big winners in this, especially with the territorial tax and all that stuff. This was going to be a huge windfall for them. You would think that it would lead to more investment in looking for cures. Evidently not. And in fact, what has been announced this weekend is not only are they ending their research of new neuroscience drugs for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, they're going to cut about 300 jobs. You go, okay. The company said, quote, "This was an exercise to relocate spending across our portfolio to focus on those areas where our pipeline and our scientific expertise is strongest." I thought giving more money to the big giant companies like Pfizer was going to bring us new drugs, and it's not, because understand, and this is where, again, we have this fundamental. I don't know if it's a brain dysfunction or what, but we actually think that these drug companies are the ones who drive most of the research, when the reality is it's we, the taxpayers, who drive most of the research. And it used to be more so before we began privatizing higher education, because a lot of it was done through research at our higher institutions of higher education. that's how we used to do things. And then we said, no. Let's give it to the drug companies and let them profit from it. So yay, there you go. Very happy, right? 300 jobs lost because of the tax cuts. Now remember, this is going to create millions of jobs. It's going to be great. So you may remember right after the tax bill was signed, you had a couple of companies who said, no, we're going to share, like AT&T. We're going to give every employee $1,000. Then you find out that they were going to lay off a whole boatload of people. I think something like 1,000 people were going to get laid off. But hey, at least everybody else got $1,000 a year. According to the CWA, who has filed a lawsuit on this, evidently they're saying that the thousands of employees, because I guess it's actually multiples of thousands, they're saying, look, this is needless. It's senseless. It's not something that should have happened. And oh, by the way, the fact that you did it right before Christmas was, quote, an extraordinary act of corporate cruelty. Merry Christmas. Here's a pink slip. Now remember, just days earlier, everyone was applauding them for going, hey, we're going to give everybody $1,000. We're going to make sure everyone gets the bonus. Personally, and I think I said this before, I would have rather had $1,000 raise than $1,000 bonus, because at least that $1,000 raise will come back the year after and the year after and the year after, instead of something that's going to get taxed at 45%. Just my thought. Also, right before Christmas, you may remember that Comcast had said that they were going to share a little bit of their massive taxed windfall with their employees, and then they laid off 500 more. And you start looking at this stuff and you go, we've seen this movie. We've seen it, and we predicted it. Not that we're, Kreskin with the ball and all of that. We simply have seen this play out. You give these big companies money, and what do? They buy back their stocks. They pump up the shares. CEOs get wealthier. They go, oh, gee, let's automate and get rid of those people, because then we can have more. That's what's going to happen. And it's what's going on in this country. And at some point, you got to think that honestly and truthfully, we've got to wake up to the reality that, these folks don't really care much about you or me, honestly. And at some point, you and I have got to figure out how it is we're going to stand up to these big corporate special interests who are just robbing us blind. And with the help of, the Trump administration. Because if you look at that that disaster of a tax bill, it was like Christmas for these big companies. Like Christmas at Christmas. See how wonderful that is? Just, I got to be honest, just mind-blowing to me. And, at a time when, and I had this is one of those moments where I had a really weird conversation over my break with a couple of guys that you would hope would know better. But here are guys who have not seen a raise in 25 years. These guys, are about my age. They've been driving a truck, about the same amount of time I have. They've worked through the same industry and watched the destruction of middle-class employment in that industry happen rapidly. So they remember the good old days, if you will, which weren't great. They were much better. And yet still, by this idea that if you give the big companies more, if you give the employer more, because they earn it, that somehow it will trickle down to the rest of us. And it's really, I'm not really sure where it came from, other than an education system that continually pushes it down our throats, a media structure that keeps hammering on this trickle down theory that has never worked, even on paper doesn't work well. Just clear, rational thinking would say that if you give one guy at the very top all the money, he's going to keep it. I mean, hello? I mean, did nobody have one kid in the classroom who stole all the candy at Halloween? Did that never happen to anybody else? He had the bucket and he left. And everyone else was looking around going, hey, where's ours? This is this tax plan. This is Republican tax policy. One guy walks away with all of the whatever. And the rest of us end up looking around at each other going, someday it'll come down. Someday there has to be a hole in the bucket. And I would argue that if there's ever a hole in the bucket, the only way we'll see that bucket is when we have to fix it. And generally for a poverty wage. But they were going on about how, talking points that they had heard from somewhere that we're going to grow the economy by, the rich people spending the money and really just this very right-wing view. Instead of saying, well, had we taken the $1.5 trillion, because look, I'm not against the idea of tax cuts, as long as they're targeted in a way that's going to benefit the economy. And I'm not even against the idea of running deficits and debt, as long as you're doing it in a way that is moving us forward. Like if you would have said, we're going to go $1.5 trillion in debt, but we're going to take that $1.5 trillion and we're going to slap it down on a down payment on fixing our infrastructure. That would have been a great plan. That's not what they did. What they did is they said, here, estate tax people, here's what Trump did. My kids are going to get to keep my entire estate. No tax is going to pay it out. $83 billion we gave to a handful of families in this country over the next decade. And yet we're holding millions of kids and their families hostage because we can't seem to get a chip bill passed. And what we're doing is we're giving all this money to these big corporations and the very wealthy in the hopes that they will invest it in our infrastructure. And I keep coming back to the question is going, okay, so we've given them the money that we should have used for infrastructure. Think about this. Hear me out. I say we should have taken that money. We should have invested it directly in infrastructure. We should have hired private contractors to build our infrastructure, and that we the people control our infrastructure. It's ours. What they're doing now is they're taking that $1.5 trillion, they're giving it away in the hopes that Wall Street and private interests will then take that money and invest in infrastructure that they can put up a toll booth or an easy pass lane or whatever and make tons of money off of. That's how they want to do infrastructure. If you've ever driven through New York City going over any of the bridges or through any of the tunnels, that's the future of transportation in this country. The way they are setting this up, it's, well, how much can you pay? How much are you willing to pay? We're already setting up toll roads in high congestion areas saying, well, are you willing to pay to go through the toll road? If not, you can wait in traffic. Instead of just saying, you know what, we alleviate traffic for everybody. No, it's about the money. And it's only going to get worse the more of it that we gave away. Just insane to me, I tell you. Just crazy. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1980. That was the day Robert Goss, president of the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union, called a nationwide strike against the oil industry. The union sought to negotiate for higher wages and better medical and dental plans in the second year of a 2-year contract. 24-hour pickets were set up immediately. For a good portion of the strike, workers at many of the refineries stopped strike-breaking scabs from entering. But some refineries used management and contract workers to maintain production levels effectively. Strikers confronted scabs daily, and in a few instances faced violence on the picket lines. At least one manager crossing picket lines was charged with second-degree assault after having rammed his car into a picketer at a Texaco refinery in Washington State. In Texas City, the deaths of 2 contract workers at an Amoco refinery made news when Amoco refused to allow a union representative to accompany an OSHA inspector through the site. Amoco sought a restraining order against OSHA and accused the agency of interjecting itself into a labor dispute. At Houston's Atlantic Richfield, women mobilized to form picket lines in defiance of an injunction against union pickets. In Los Angeles, area unions including the UAW, UE, ILWU, and the Teamsters formed the Los Angeles Harbor Council in solidarity with the strike. On March 1st, the council conducted a one-day shutdown of the LA ports and strike support rally that demanded victory to the OCAW strike. Oil workers would stay out 14 weeks before the strike was finally settled. They successfully won pay increases and increases in employer contributions to the medical plan and dental plan for the very first time. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Your working class radio experience, where hard work, common sense, and rational thought are a reality. The Rick Smith Show.
Working hard to make a left, rain shed from rain. My father, son, left to carry on, blue denim, had his fate. He's a working class man.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Lindsey Graham. Good old Lindsey. Evidently, Lindsey today can't make this stuff up. I mean, honestly, truthfully. Lindsey Graham said today that he didn't think that Donald Trump is xenophobic. He doesn't think he's a race-baiting religious bigot. Not anymore. Not as president. No. He's not that anymore. Yet, during the campaign, you may remember, he said all of that stuff. He was xenophobic. He was a race-baiting bigot. All of that. And I guess he said, things are different now. He won. And now you have, no, I don't think he's that anymore. Gee, thanks, Lindsey. Appreciate that. But, here's the weird thing. The president just seems to be getting crazier and crazier and farther off the deep end. In fact, it kind of reminded me of one of those things, a recent tweet where he said that he's not just smart, he's a genius and a very stable genius. At that. And I thought of my mother, who you say, if you have to tell somebody that you're something, you're probably not. Just a thought. I'm here to talk about the latest comments by our instability in chief, our good friend Propane Jane. Jane, thanks for taking time for us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me back, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well. So what did you think? He's not just a genius. He's not just smart, but he's a very stable genius.
I actually wondered if he actually read Instability in Chief. Is he answering me back now? I mean, it's almost too perfect, actually.
But here's the thing. What he's saying, he's going, look, I was a top businessman, very successful. I was a top TV star, very successful, Jane. And now president, first try.
So why is he saying that? I mean, why does he feel the need to say that? If he's, as you said, if he is so smart and if he's so stable, and if this is just so obvious a fact, why does he have to constantly remind us that that's the case?
And that's the question, isn't it? I mean, because at the end of it, I go back to, as my mother said, if someone's telling you how great they are, maybe they got a problem. And I look at this guy, and he's got a lot of problems. Right.
I mean, in the last couple of weeks, we've seen a lot of psychiatrists are being brought on to television now, all of a sudden, to kind of weigh in and analyze what's happening from week to week. But in general, I think the reputation that Trump has is that most people think he's narcissistic, not necessarily in a formal way, but they just think of him in that sense. But in a clinical sense, when we talk about narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder, what most people are referring to, it's actually paradoxically is rooted in very low self-esteem. And so though those individuals who we consider to be quote unquote narcissistic will constantly puff their chest out and say, I'm the best thing since sliced bread, I'm so smart, I'm so handsome. Ultimately, that's the complete opposite of how they're feeling on the inside. So really it's like, no, I don't feel very smart. I don't feel very stable. People are actually saying that I'm not stable. And so he is basically saying something to counter his innermost insecurities, actually. And it's more like him kind of talking to the mirror on the wall and trying to reassure his own self that what he's hearing in the media about himself is not actually true.
So kind of like getting one of those Al Franken skits. You're
Exactly.
good enough, and people like you.
Exactly. I mean, because the chatter is still there. You and I did our first podcast on Inauguration Day. That's almost a year to the date, January 20th, 2017, and we were having a very similar conversation. We were talking about instability in chief. I wrote that article in December of 2016. And I don't think it's unfair to say that he's actually gotten worse since then. For everyone that's sort of a novice and not actually looking at him from a clinician standpoint, his mental status has deteriorated. His behavior has deteriorated. And he continues to be erratic. He continues to be very, undiplomatic in terms of how he deals with domestic issues and foreign issues.
Yeah, I mean, I used to think that maybe it was just all part of the shtick. Maybe it was, here's a guy who likes chaos, he likes turmoil, he likes to get people pitted against one another because there is a management style, there is a management belief that if people are angry and there's tension, that you're going to work harder and be more creative. I don't prescribe to it, but some people do.
Yeah.
But here I used to think that was part of his shtick. Now I just think that this is a guy who's really not there.
Yeah, I certainly think that it was part of his shtick when he was in his heyday and when he was at his full capacity as an individual before he started to experience what I would say by outward observation is cognitive decline of some degree. And I do think that Donald Trump in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s was so much better organized in terms of his cognition that he was able to be a more effective con artist. He was able to build this image of himself that has kept him in the public eye, in the spotlight, despite what we're now coming to realize is, a lack of intelligence and a lack of just sophistication. But I do think that what we're seeing, at 71 years old is someone who is actually unable to keep things straight on a day-to-day basis, is unable to remember things, is unable to remember even what he's saying, his own self, and constantly contradicting himself and even contradicting people in his administration. And so he really isn't doing himself any favors, for all of the reputation he has for being such a smooth player and mastermind or stable genius, quote unquote.
Yeah, stable genius. Were you surprised to hear that he has, and I love this, I'm going to use this label from now on for whenever I want to slack off, that he has executive time from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. every day or till noon some days?
It must be nice. It must be nice. I mean, I'm not able to do that. I have to be at work at 8 o'clock.
But here's the thing. I mean, there's part of me that goes, can we just give him executive time all the time?
But what is he doing, actually? Do we know that, everything that has come out about him in recent months, and I'm not just talking about Fire and Fury, but even these, Washington Post pieces and the New York Times had a piece, where they talked about his quote-unquote self-preservation. And in that piece, he is reported to be drinking up to 12 cans of Diet Coke a day. He's watching up to 8 hours of cable news on television.
That's enough to make anybody crazy.
Well, exactly. I mean, and we actually know that there's scientific evidence to suggest that diet drinks can actually cause neurological dysfunction. And so in a lot of ways, he's not actually taking care of himself. And he's not doing what you would need to do in terms of your diet, your exercise. to be able to keep up with the level of stress that's coming his way. We also know he doesn't sleep. We also know that he's rageful most of the time. And so I think that's why he's constantly having to answer to his own fitness to serve, because he's not actually comporting himself in healthy ways, and in ways that are representative of, you know, what we think should be presidential.
Yeah, I have a friend who she talks to dead people, and you know, she predicted that Trump was going to win, you know, well back into the beginning of the end of 15 into 16, and at the time she even predicted that he was going to win, but that he was going to die in office within the first 2 years. And you know, you look at all of this stuff that, you know, as you've just laid out, and you go, he's really, you know, he's really setting himself up for that.
He is. I mean, he's constantly, you know, picking fights. He's constantly, you know, seething about something. You know, we never just have a period where, you know, he's content, he's doing his business, you know, as it's supposed to go. He's meeting with, you know, members of Congress. They're hashing out legislation. You know, it's constantly this up and down. He's every month or so, he's into it with North Korea, and he's about to push the button. And so this isn't stable. And so this is why I actually call him instability in chief, because the nation as a whole is unstable. You know, how we look to the rest of the world is chaotic. You don't know where we stand from one day to the next. And that's a function of the chief executive himself being very unstable and disorganized.
Yeah, I mean, but here's the thing. I mean, there are very real consequences, and those around him. And I think this book, you know, kind of, you know, shows some of this. You know, not to the extent that I think it should. I think this was a very kind of surface level look. But there are very real consequences, because the report came out today that I saw that, you know, Trump and the other one want to. I think it's Mattis. They want to go to North Korea.
To do what?
Start bombing, baby, bomb.
To what end?
Well, just because you can.
Right. And so this.
Because my button's bigger. My button's bigger.
Right. And so this is where we go back to, you know, what we were talking about in the beginning of the segment, in terms of him reassuring himself that he's the boss and he's in control, and reassuring the rest of the world that his you-know-what is bigger. And what lengths will he go to prove that, quote unquote? And, you know, we know that in his mind, this, you know, bravado is what he sees as strength. And so even if it isn't necessarily productive or safe, this is the tack he's going to take, because, you know, he thinks that it makes him look like more of a man.
Yeah. Did you see this this report out today? Evidently, there was some an analysis done of his speech patterns, and they I guess used this. Maybe you would know it better than I do. This Flesch-Kincaid grade level scale.
Okay.
And they've put him at a 4th grade level, the lowest president of the last 15, the lowest of the last 15 presidents.
I mean, what can I say? I'm not surprised. And I think it's actually very curious, because in some ways, I think there are very unique parallels. A lot of those comparisons, when they look at speech and they look at the complexity of speech, there's a lot of interesting parallels between Trump and Ronald Reagan. And in a piece that I did, I believe it was probably in March of this year, called POTUS by Proxy, I talked about this idea that when Reagan, you know, was president, there were certain things that people kind of noticed about his speech patterns, but it wasn't necessarily something that, you know, took hold in terms of, you know, the mainstream media. But as time has gone on, leading up to 2015, actually, researchers have gone back and they've looked at the complexity of his speech and how over time, how it changed and how the amount of words or the types of words that he would use in a sentence became ever so rudimentary, as time went on. And that's something you can actually see when you compare Trump's speech now, not even just to other presidents, but Trump to himself. 5 years ago versus 10 years ago versus 20 years ago. And so those are the types of things that clinicians like myself, pay attention to in terms of just the words that are coming out of his mouth, and really want to see him more formally evaluated, although we hear today that he's not going to actually submit to at least the psychiatric evaluation. Now, I don't know if he's actually going to do a neurological evaluation, but it would be interesting to see how he tests out on these objective measures in terms of his language and his cognition.
No, he's just going to go to the doctor that he had there in New York. The one what did he say? He was he wrote a letter, said he was the best fit for a man his age he's ever seen, and really just kind of
the healthiest man in the world. I mean, who are we kidding?
Yeah, astonishingly excellent health. Was the word that he used. Guy's name was what? Bornstein, I think his name was.
How is that possible? How is that possible when he eats nothing but Big Mac and KFC, and he doesn't do, from what we can tell, any form of cardio?
He golfs 30 times a day.
He does not walk long distances.
That's true.
They ride him around in golf carts. I'm not certain that he's getting his heart rate up enough, to actually fight off, to ward off some of these very common, medical problems that most Americans, these are major problems in our society in terms of public health. I mean, diabetes, high cholesterol, heart attack, stroke. I mean, these are all of the things that, if we were actually counseling a patient, I'm just thinking of, when I was in elementary school, I don't know if you remember the President's Challenge. Did they have that?
Yep.
Like when you were, and like, I remember, you were sort of expected to do like a certain amount of push-ups or, pull-ups, et cetera, et cetera. And there was like this image, even I remember as a kid, of like the president wants you to be healthy and wants you to exercise, and I just feel like Trump doesn't exude sort of any of those qualities himself. And it's just sort of an interesting reflection, because I think the nation is very unhealthy, during his tenure.
Yeah, but isn't that a sign of? Isn't he a sign of who? They say look in the mirror. That's
right.
He's
exactly.
who we are.
Yeah, and that's very. It's shameful. It's shameful that this is where we are, and this is sort of what we are putting forth to the world, and even though it's something that only 30% of the country is on board with, roughly 30% of the country is on board with, that the other 60 to 70% of us are just learned helplessness, I guess, that we're just sitting here watching him just falter every day.
Yeah,
it's an emergency, but it's not being treated as though it's an emergency.
No, it's scary stuff. But again, I look at this study, this analysis. He's in mid-fourth grade level. You go, I got to be honest. I want somebody a little bit smarter than that to be the president. Just kind of saying.
Yeah, but the thing is that how much of this is how smart he is, and how much of this is age-related brain degeneration? What is the likelihood of that? What is the likelihood of that in a man who has a family history of Alzheimer's in a first-degree relative?
Oh.
Given what we're seeing, are we talking about something that is a fourth-grade level, or are we talking about someone who is nearing the end of their life and they have age-related brain degeneration, and so their cognitive status has regressed to that of a fourth grader?
So don't your advisors around you? I mean, I saw over the weekend you had Stephen Miller, you had Propaganda Barbie, you had a bunch of people out there defending him. Aren't these people concerned a bit? I mean, because they've got to see the same things that you're seeing, and people have got to be telling them the same things. Because hey, look, you're right. I've followed Trump for years. He used to do Howard Stern all the time, and the guy used to, he was what he was.
Right.
But he wasn't this.
No, he wasn't this at all. And now we're getting less and less exposure to him. There's less time in a 24-hour day that he's even available to pretend that he's competent enough to be president. I mean, now he's not starting until 11 o'clock, and they have to get him out of public view, no later than 6:30. And so this is the reality of how they're shuffling him off to the golf course every weekend. They're doing a lot of things that are extremely uncharacteristic of what we've expected a president, the stamina we've expected a president to have. Hillary Clinton, was taking laps around the globe compared to what Trump is doing in terms of work ethic and work effort. So I think that it's alarming because he's erratic and he's unpredictable, but I think it's also alarming in the sense of he is not proving to be capable of just keeping up with what's going on physically nor mentally.
It's scary stuff. Last question I've got: What are you paying attention to over the next couple of days, next couple of weeks? What are we looking for?
Well, hopefully we're looking for Congress to actually hold his feet to the fire in terms of this Mueller investigation. It sounds like he's trying to weasel out of it in some ways. And I think that, they should be making it very clear that that's not an option. And I also think that we should see whether or not he actually submits to a psychiatric evaluation. And if he doesn't, what Congress plans to do about that in light of the fact that they've been briefed by a psychiatrist that this is perilous, mental instability.
Yeah, I got to wonder if Congress has the authority to force him to take a test.
We'll have to see.
Yep. Interesting times.
We might have to force it.
There you go. And I'm all in favor of it. Jane, I appreciate the time. Great talking with you.
You too. Have a good week.
Good stuff. Our good friend Propane Jane. And look, I think every president should have to submit, every candidate should have to submit to mental testing, simply because we should find out if you're crazy enough just to run. Just kind of a thought. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
From New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. Pope Francis gave his yearly State of the World speech on Monday, warning more than 180 Vatican ambassadors that a century after World War I, efforts to enshrine international peace were crumbling. Francis praised 56 countries for signing a treaty prohibiting nuclear weapons in 2017, but cautioned that the rate of negative developments was outpacing positive developments. Francis urged negotiations to end the standoff on the Korean Peninsula and in Syria, and in a line that seemingly targeted leaders in Europe and the United States, he criticized those who stoke fears about warnings over migrants and migration. It must not be forgotten that migration has always existed, Francis said, reminding the crowd that, quote, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the history of salvation is essentially a history of migration. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is celebrating his birthday on Monday. The precise year of his birth is unknown, with experts from various countries pinning him down as 34, 35, or 36. Either way, one thing is for certain. This year's birthday is a little different. 2 years ago, Kim preceded his birthday week with a nuclear test, the largest in the country's history at that time. But this year, he's preparing for peace talks. On Tuesday, North Korean and South Korean diplomats will meet at the DMZ to discuss arrangements surrounding next month's South Korean Olympic Games. And Vice President Mike Pence will head to the Middle East later this month, with planned stops in Egypt, Jordan, and Israel. Pence had initially planned that trip for December in the weeks after President Trump's recognition of Jerusalem, but that visit was delayed in case Pence was needed as a deciding vote in the tax reform push. For more global news headlines, visit TalkMediaNews.com.
Where family values are more than slogans. The Rick Smith Show. Family values are more than slogans. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So very disappointed. This is the day that we returned. I was really looking forward to the Trump Media Awards. It was supposed to be today at 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock came and went, 6, 7, 8, all gone. Is it that he just didn't do his homework?
Is it that, he didn't really think it through?
Here's the thing.
Is it that he just didn't do his homework?
And said, oh, let's do this?
Is it that, he didn't really think it through?
Is it that he was just impulsive and said, oh, let's do this?
Maybe someone was indicted.
Maybe Mueller was investigating part of it.
Maybe a staffer quit. Maybe someone was indicted. Maybe Mueller was investigating part of it. Who knows? But still, the big awards, lots of buzz over on fake news. To be honest, none of my other friends actually knew what was going on. I guess I was the only one. And here to talk a little bit about the big awards and, well, how we should be handling them. I've got Christina Lopez. She's a senior researcher over at Media Matters for America. Christina, thanks for taking time for us.
Always a pleasure to be here, Rick.
So are you as disappointed as I am? No golden chalices, because they'd be gold, right?
To be perfectly honest, I was not surprised. Not surprised because this is just, it's part of the pattern that we've come to expect from the Trump administration, where most of the things seem improvised, or at best, they don't seem to follow a specific strategy. So, to just announce, come out and announce and botch his own announcement by not following through and then moving it just shows you that there's no strategy, no coordination, and clearly a total lack of preparation here. It just comes to confirm something that we've already known. Now, with respect of how media should be treating this is clearly just another tool in the toolbox for Trump and his continued attacks on the media, clearly because it's necessary for him to kill the messenger, especially in times when media are constantly reporting on where the Russia probe is advancing, on how incompetent the administration is, on the leaks, multiple leaks surrounding the White House, and just showing the total lack of professionalism and the complete lack of coordination or lack of purpose and agenda that the administration has shown. So one of the tools for Trump has become to kill the messenger and therefore continue discrediting the media so that his loyal base continues to be loyal to him.
Yeah. But if you look at this past weekend, the whole fire and fury thing and all of these distractions, we're really not talking about the issues that are really affecting everyday Americans. In fact, the voters who voted for him, who were sending the message, hey, we're angry, we're ticked off, we're struggling, we need help. And yet what we're seeing out of this administration is lots of shiny things, lots of distractions, not much substance, not much in the way of making people's lives better.
Correct. And today is actually a great example of the point that you just made, that by covering this, by wasting time and distracting media with petty agendas, it's actually to the detriment of the economy, of the people that, he should be thinking of benefiting. Today was a big news day in that the Trump administration revoked the TPS, which is a temporary protection status for 200,000 Salvadorans. Those are 200,000 Salvadorans who are in this country legally because of the temporary protected status, and who obviously because of that permit have had a job for 20 years, and are supporting families with, American kids that they've had here. And the fact that media barely took time to cover this because is constantly being distracted by what you said, the shiny objects, the fact that Trump imposes this petty media narratives like the media awards, which is why we are suggesting at Media Matters that the best way that media can do in response to President Trump's, it's clearly a cynical stunt. So the best thing that media can do is to give it absolutely zero coverage. Pay zero attention to it because you know exactly what's coming. It's just going to be continuous insults against the media. It's just going to be the continued campaign to delegitimize the power of the free press. And you know, if we are to judge based on the shining coverage that Fox News is providing to it, you know who are going to be the biggest winners and losers of this event.
Yeah, anyone who has anything bad to say about Trump ever, they're going to be the quote-unquote winners. And, of course, Fox News could do no wrong.
Well, and Fox News is eager to provide this sort of coverage because it serves two purposes, right? For Fox News, it serves the purpose of advancing the Trump agenda, of continuing to be on Trump's good side and getting that access and that influence and impact that they've come to they've come to achieve under the Trump administration, because as we know, the president has a lot of time in his hands to watch cable news, and his preferred shows are on Fox News, and therefore they can guarantee access and guarantee that they will get the interviews if they continue to cover the Trump administration in the way that Trump likes to be covered, in absolutely glowing reviews. And therefore, this morning, Fox News was carrying water and hyping these awards show as if they themselves did not benefit from, you know, having a strong First Amendment, from a free press, from having media do its job, which is keeping tabs on those in power and speaking through to power.
Yeah, but you know, here's the thing. You look at this. This is such an easy story to cover, though. And it's going to get people riled up. It's going to bring viewers in. It seems like we're chasing the shiny thing always, because it seems that that's what viewers want. That's what listeners want. That's what people want to be talking about, the latest bit of insanity that's come out of this White House, and really not the deep subjects of just how bad this administration is going to be, not just for today, but for the future of this country as the rest of the world turns their back on us.
Correct. It's really important, and in a way, we're aware that we're fighting a losing battle here when, you know, we suggest that media should absolutely ignore it by virtue of it being something that the president is doing that is in and of its own news, and you know, the attacks on the free press coming from the president in a free democracy are something that definitely should be documented. The problem is that media should know that coming into this, you get no wins from providing coverage, in the sense that your audience is not benefited by seeing yet another Trump attack on the media, seeing yet another cynical stunt, and another attempt to distract from the narrative of the important things that are going on. All those important things being that healthcare is still, you know, not something that every American has.
And there are children across this country who are going to lose their health insurance because the Republicans still have not reauthorized the children's health insurance program, which to me is just criminal. The fact that they're going to give away $1.5 trillion to the very wealthy, the fact that he wants to spend $18 billion on a wall that I thought Mexico was going to pay for, and yet we can't get health insurance for children, is just deplorable. It's insanity, but it's not unpredictable. This is what Republicans have wanted for a very long time, and they're just using the useful idiot in the orange suit in the White House.
And see, the problem here, too, is that it's a trap for the media, because this is the kind of story that becomes irresistible for big cable news. Because, in a way, it's a story about themselves. It's a story in which they get to, in which clearly they are the targets of the attack, but they can present it's almost too much of a temptation to pass on an opportunity to cover a story that pretty much is about themselves.
And you hope you get one of the awards. Look, today I was hoping to get one. I was hoping to get a big giant T, gold giant
it would be
T.
A badge of honor.
Exactly, because it means that you're actually doing something that I think the president doesn't like. I mean, I was thinking about this morning when you remember when President Obama was president and we weren't crazy, or at least most of us weren't.
Time ago.
It seems like a lifetime ago. But if you remember every book that came out against Obama, Denise D'Souza, you go down the list of all the crazy people, Laura Ingraham, everybody had a book about how horrible Obama was. If he were to go out and say, we're going to ban all these books, what do you think the right wing in this country would have done?
Absolutely. And it sort of reminds you of how worried about abuse of power, conservative media used to be back in, just in the Obama administration, how concerned about the First Amendment and the free press they used to be. And when really what media should do right now is present a unified front, a unified front in this battle that Trump is waging against the press, which he also has accomplices in the right-wing media. He has a Fox News network that is complicit in pushing these narratives day in and day out that are favorable to them, because at the end of the day, it's just kneecapping their competition.
Yeah. And also gives them, like you said, it gives them the access. And then you have this kind of feedback loop where they say something and Trump regurgitates it, or Trump says something and it's this whole incestuous kind of pool of nonsense. But, and I don't know if you saw this, but John Dean, the Watergate lawyer, he said, look, if Richard Nixon had a Fox News, he probably wouldn't have resigned. And, I look at that and I go, that's quite telling about where our media structure is today than to where it was just 40 years ago.
Absolutely. And if you consider who gets harmed the most by these feedback loops that you're just mentioning, you think about the audiences of Fox News. These are audiences that are pretty much, they're being held captive. They are trapped in their bubble in which they hear the same thing over and over again. And they not once hear a counter argument or, the reality of things. And they are, to quote Kellyanne Conway, they're trapped in this bubble of alternative facts. And of course that is hurtful to democracy in the long term, in the sense that you have voters who don't really care about the reality that is presented to them and about the evidence that is presented to them, because the campaign to legitimize the media and the job that journalists do has been going on for such a long time that now reporting the news is actually viewed as a partisan affair.
And it's just amazing to me. And maybe it's, maybe we're heading towards one of these major collapse kind of scenarios where, I had a friend of mine say, Donald Trump's going to lead us to the end times. And I'm going, I kind of hope not.
I like to keep an optimistic view of it, but it doesn't. It's also important to know what we're up against, in the sense that the biggest problem here is not just Fox News. There are also the fact that there's an entire network of alternative media now that is emboldened by Trump and has rode Trump's coattails to success. And now you have InfoWars, and now you have tons of other media, digital media outlets that have sometimes even larger audiences that what you could come to expect from Fox News.
Now, I know one of the things I just saw the other day.
Deeper than that.
One of the things I just saw the other day that grabbed my attention, and just to kind of highlight what you were saying about these conservative outlets, and just running with something. Evidently, there was a fire in one of the bathrooms in the Secret Service quarter at one of the Clinton houses, and right away it was the Clintons are burning servers. Kind of like Dick Cheney did. And the right-wing blogosphere and the right-wing echo chamber just went crazy for a day and a half or two. And I got emails from all kinds of people. The Clintons are destroying their servers. And I'm going, no, they're not. They weren't even home. They couldn't have done it. They weren't home.
Correct. And so in this media landscape in which part of most of what Trump does is attack, legitimate media outlets and try to discredit legitimate journalists, these alternative narratives thrive because they exist solely with the purpose of distracting the Trump base from things that could be damaging to the image that they have of their president.
it's definitely a scary time, and the hope is that more people wake up and more people pay attention, and I think that only happens as things sadly get worse. But lastly, so you're not paying attention to the big media awards that are, I guess, coming out on the 17th now. Was supposed to happen today, pushed off, and I would guess probably because he didn't actually do his homework again.
Ideally, in an ideal world, the less media pay attention to this and the less it remains on the news cycle, the better it will be. They will definitely. This is not what I think is going to happen, but if this gets too much attention, it's enabling Trump and it's emboldening him to continue this war in the press, which at the end of the day is just a distraction.
I'm with you, Christina. I appreciate the time. Great talking with you.
Pleasure to be here, Rick.
Good stuff. I appreciate the time. Let's take a quick break. Right back with your thoughts. 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Often, significant days in history pass with little attention. This day in labor history is one such day. The year was 1811, and Charles Deslandes, an enslaved sugar laborer in the New Orleans Territory, led what became one of the largest slave revolts in American history. The Deslandes family, along with Charles, had been in Haiti during the slave uprising of the Haitian Revolution. They fled the revolution to what was then called the German Coast, an area of sugar plantations northwest of New Orleans. On the evening of January 8th, Charles led an insurrection at the Andre Plantation. The insurrection grew as enslaved laborers marched down the Mississippi River armed with axes, hoes, and a few firearms. They burnt plantations on their march. It's estimated that as many as 500 enslaved laborers joined the revolt over the two-day march. The revolution was put down brutally, however, by plantation owners and their militias, as well as federal troops who killed more than 90 of the revolting slaves. The plantation bosses, with their militias and the federal troops, hung some of the bodies of those who took part in the revolt on poles as warnings to other enslaved people. Such uprisings ushered in an era of brutal repression, as authorities worried that the Haitian Revolution could spread to the U.S. South. Slave codes, the laws that undergirded the slave system, became more strict and oppressive, yet enslaved people continued their effort for freedom until they finally won emancipation more than 5 decades later. And what happened to Charles Deslandes, you may ask? Well, he was captured by the militia. As Samuel Hamilton described, Charles had his hands chopped off, then shot in one thigh and then the other, until they were both broken, then shot in the body. And before he had expired, he was put into a bundle of straw and roasted. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my Union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery before this war is won. You're bound to lose. You fascists are bound to lose.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. So interesting little bit coming out of the national championship game tonight. Evidently, the president was on camera during the national anthem. He was not kneeling, but evidently doesn't know the words. He was mouthing something. They just didn't match any words that are actually in the song. And I've watched the video clip of it a couple of times to where I'm going, no, I'm not making out any words whatsoever that look anything like it. And it's made me now think of a new theory.
This theory is going to go along because you remember my last one was that, anybody the people who want the 10 Commandments plastered everywhere are probably the people who don't know it. I think I'm going to go with the same kind of theory with the national anthem. The people who think you shouldn't be able to kneel or whatever, people who probably don't know it. Just kind of say, because look, I've gone to sporting events and I've looked around and I've watched people who they were mouthing something, clearly not the words. So that's going to be what we're going to be talking about all day, I guess, tomorrow. No words. Wow. Big news coming up in the coming days. You're going to want to tune in. Thanks so much for being here tonight. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Have a great night.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.